Welcome to the Prime People Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Konikow, and every single week we are dropping nuggets of information that you can take and implement in your business in a massive way. And I happen to know a lot of very interesting people, and one of the most interesting people I've met is Mr. Marvin Reid, who is with me today. He is the founder of Volume 2 Media. He's worked with some institutional level companies, and he's very good at getting to decision makers. So we're going to chop it up. We're going to talk about sales and marketing techniques. I'm going to drill in and ask him questions that I would ask in private conversations so I can implement it in my business. So if you want to implement it in yours, stick around because I'm sure he's going to deliver the goods. As always, if you know anybody that's looking to grow any type of business, we do all of this for free. I don't sell any coaching or courses or anything. All I ask is that you share this out with other people so we can create an amazing community. But let's get right to it. Mr. Marvin, welcome to the Prime People Podcast.
How are you? I'm absolutely ecstatic to finally be here. It's been a while since I've been threatening to sort of catch up with you, definitely. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, well, let's give a little bit of background, right? We spent a lot of time together in Breakfast with Champions. That's where I initially met you through our mutual friend, Glenn Lundy. I mean, in that room, we've been around people like Seth Godin, Tiffany Haddish, Ashton Kutcher was there one day. And it's interesting because like the core group of mods, we all do our own thing in our own businesses, but we bring it back to the table and we share expert insights from like our industries with each other. We implement, and I've always defined real friendships are the ones where people can go away for a little bit and then come back and the energy remains the same. And you're one of those people that I'm always curious when you speak, always try and stick around and listen. So I know you super well, but for my audience who don't know you, can you give us a little bit of your experience and background to set the stage here?
Yeah, sure. My name is Marvin Reid. I've been in the kind of sales, marketing, branding, and strategy space for a substantial amount of time now, over 20 years. And I think it's funny. It's only in times like this where I speak to people and they say, "Oh yeah, can you just give us your background?" You realize how long you've been at it. I tend to stay within my wheelhouse. So I've initially from university days involved in design, then went on to run a design agency in London for a while. Moved on from there to work for a large outsourcing organization, so I went from running a design agency where we were turning over around 3 or 4 million, depending on whether it was a good year or a bad year, to working with an organization that turned over 145 million per year. So it was very, very different. Getting involved in from hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of contracts to hundreds of millions of pounds worth of contracts. I've probably had a good range of experience and worked with some fantastic clients, really. You know, people like Bentley and Johnson & Johnson and Budweiser and people like that. I've really enjoyed the corporate rat race over here in London, and now I think it gets to the point where you kind of figure out your passion, and then you move from your passion to figuring out your purpose, right? So I think for me now, what I really, really enjoy doing is working with SMEs and small businesses and helping them understand the strategies that a lot of the bigger organizations use. And it's funny, I feel like that's kind of like my purpose now, and after being on the journey that I've been on, to now sort of working really closely with SMEs and smaller businesses.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to Alex Hermosi and Andy Friselia recently, and they were chopping it up, doing what they do, right? And they're kind of like friends like you and I. They had never met before, and they were doing a podcast for the first time. And they both said, despite the fact that they have scaled massive companies, they're actually more interested in the come up and working with businesses that have their hands in the sauce, that are really having an impact on a consumer level than necessarily the corporations that have massive boards, and they become bigger than something where you can truly have an impact and you become more of an advisor than you do actually involved in the process. So I think that's definitely our audience. A lot of people, in our ecosystem, they want to do exactly what you said you're going to tell them, how to use strategies that large companies are using to impact your business in a big way. And I definitely want to get to that. Before that, though, what were you like as a kid? Like, where did the bug for marketing come from?
Oh, man. So look, I always like to be quite open and transparent, and I definitely, if I was to lie and say, oh yeah, I was really good at school and so on and so forth, there'd be some teacher somewhere that would crawl out the woodworks and basically call me a liar and so on and so forth. So I'll be totally honest, I wasn't great at school, and it wasn't so much that I didn't have the the skill set in terms of academically. It was just more, I don't know, I just,
Attention span?
attention span maybe,
That's because that
uh
was me. Like I was
constantly want to,
terrible in
yeah,
school.
just
Yeah,
constantly messing around. And then it went from that to, I don't know, maybe being distracted by other things. And also it's the environment of the other kids
yeah,
around you as well, really. Do you know what I mean? Because I didn't grow up in a great area at all. So
sure,
the people who were really good in the class were probably few and sort of far between, really. Do you know what I mean? Like in terms of like
sure.
high achievers. So it
Because
was
they didn't
easy
have
to
the
sort of,
example, right? Like having good people around you can actually
absolutely,
shift your entire
absolutely,
worldview, right?
yeah, yeah. And it's funny because now that I'm in the position I'm in now, where I talk to people about cultivating your environment to increase the success and all of that kind of stuff. Now, when I think about it, in terms of like how, where I grew up and where I'm from and the people around me and what I was exposed to, it's kind of like, well, to be honest with you, I probably did all right. Do you know what I mean? To come out of that environment, but yeah, I think it's funny because I think when I think back at my childhood, it definitely, there's definitely, I can see the turning points now. I couldn't
Mhm.
see them at the time, but I can see the turning points now, and I can see the turning points that contribute towards really telling me who I am and who I was at that point, and so on and so forth. Because what pushed me really wasn't my parents sort of beating me over the head and saying, look, you got to concentrate on your books and so on and so forth. There was no talk of entrepreneurship or anything like that. It was, you will be a doctor, or you will be a this, or you will be a that. Basically get a career and get a job. But it was more people telling me that I wasn't going to make it. And that was
Mhm.
the thing that really, and I think somewhere along the way, I managed to tap into my stubbornness, where I was like, oh, okay, well, if you think I'm not going to make it, then I'm going to actually double down and prove you wrong. And I think if I was to look back at my childhood, especially sort of that transition going into university, then it's probably that's probably one of the biggest takeaways from my childhood. In amongst all the other messing around.
Yeah, and that's part of being a kid and growing up. I was talking to
Mhm.
somebody about this today, and we'll probably definitely have to talk about Twitter threads a little bit or Instagram threads later on today. But I was talking
Yeah,
about how
yeah.
like each ecosystem to me, I do spend time curating. I didn't do it in my past. It's only been a really recent thing where I pay very close attention to who I surround myself with, what's in proximity to me, because it does impact your worldview. And looking back at things in the past that I thought would have been trials and tribulations, quite often those things end up being the greatest lessons you ever learned that put you in a position to succeed. You mentioned a couple kind of pivot points that you recognized that allowed you to break through that maybe you didn't recognize back then. What were some of those pivot points?
Well, just as I was kind of, I suppose, alluding to, really, just the idea. It's funny. Some of the and this is where, well, not, you mentioned Clubhouse at the top of the conversation. I think
Mhm.
this is where Clubhouse has been really, really helpful, because it's not forced me, but it's opened my mind and my memory bank when I kind of speak about specific stories that pop into my head as I'm speaking. Um, it almost sort of teaches you that, okay, actually that was a pivoting point, or that was a point that says a lot about who I am as an individual. It's a story that I've not spoken about anywhere else apart from Clubhouse more recently, where I remember. Um, so my parents were separating. My dad was in Derby. I think I was over staying at my dad's at the time, so I had to call in to get my results from school. And uh, I remember calling in. I wasn't expecting anything great. Do you know what I mean? I was, I was a realist. Let's just say. But I called in and I spoke to one of the teachers that absolutely hated me, and I
Oh
knew
no.
she hated me because I didn't really have any love for her either. And in all fairness, I wouldn't, as much as I think she wasn't the best of teachers, I accept my responsibility as probably not being one of the best of students. But I called up, she picked up the phone, and it's almost like the way she answered the phone was like she was about to enjoy telling me that I had failed and that, you know, all of my results were useless and I was going to have to retake exams and so on and so on and so forth. Because literally the smugness was resonating across the phone. It was like, oh, Marvin, how are you? And I suppose you'll be calling up for your results, are you? And you know, that kind of
Yeah,
smugness.
for sure.
And literally, she opened the paper. I heard her opening the paper, and then there was this real silence, and it was kind of like, oh, you haven't done that badly after all. And she read out my results, and I'd got like A's and B's and things like that. And literally, you could tell that it was absolutely killing her on the phone to give me those results. And I suppose at the last minute, I'd kind of buckled down and just got with it. But it was that's one of the points that I realized. You know what? You kind of have to. A lot of people want you to fail, or even if they don't want you to fail, they don't care about you really winning. So you have to recognize that, and do you know what I mean? Sort of, you know, go for it, because if you don't go for it, no one else is going to go for it for you. Do you know what I mean? I think that's one of the biggest things that sticks in my head, and it's resonated with me more and more and more from that day that I mentioned it on Clubhouse, because I had never thought about it up until that point. It was just something that's happened in my past, and it kind of like, you know, but it really, really sort of stuck in my mind, and it's something that I'm saying, right, okay, I'll put that in the bank. That can go in the power bank. Do you know what I mean? Ready to utilize as a bit of motivation in the future.
Yeah. So, and I think in the world that we live in today, people seem to be addicted to instant gratification and allergic to accountability, right? And you know, you look at a story like that and you look for ways of sharpening your sword, and you know, maybe you got ready at the last minute, crushed it, did really well,
Yeah.
but you think of, well, what would have happened if I actually applied myself, right? And I can think of stories that resonate that I'm thinking about now as you're saying that from my past, that maybe put me in a position of vulnerability. And if I was accountable, I could say, well, instead of somebody else coming to help me, I'm going to help myself. I'm going to go and get the tools and then apply them. You know, you went and worked for some amazing blue chip companies. Obviously, like, what was the gap between, say, the schooling and you and going and getting a skill set that allowed you to accomplish that?
So I think, again, it's, you know, that they always say that you have to kind of look to the past to learn the most about yourself, and then apply that to move into the future and achieve the things that you really want to achieve. And I think when I look back, there's always been someone saying, "Oh, you're not going to be able to do that," or "You're not going to be able to do this." And even when I think before I set up Volume 2 back in 2016, 2017, and before that, I was employed. I had a job, and there was always someone saying, "Oh, yeah, you're never going to hit that. You know, you can go for this, but you probably won't make it." And it's even down to, I remember being at one company, and I would always do reading and work outside of the organizations I was in. So the one thing that I always knew is that the more informed you are, especially from a sales perspective, the more informed you are, then that's always going to benefit you when it comes into having any conversation. And so I remember at one company, I was saying, look, you know, the way forward is to go for these government tenders. You know, it's a secure pipeline and so on and so forth. And there was the owner of the company was adamant, no, that's a waste of time. Just get on the phones, just do this. Da, da, da. And I was, at this point, I wasn't, you know, high enough in the company to say, no, I disagree, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I actually ended up unpaid, staying behind late every single day to look for, because if he saw me doing it in the daytime, following up on the government tenders in the daytime, he'd be like, what are you doing, sort of thing. So I'd do it in my own time, totally unpaid, and I ended up landing some of the biggest contracts, well, actually the biggest contracts that the company had, do you know what I mean, and doubling the revenue that the company made. So it's little things like that. And I suppose now, having the self-awareness I've got years later, being able to look back and connect the dots to say, right, okay, I can see a kind of continuous theme here going through. And I think, you know, that's what I always encourage people to do, because the evidence will be there. It's just whether or not we are open to recognizing those the key points, you know.
Yeah, I love that story, because I always say in our industry, a sale is just a latent indicator of success. The sale came because you did the actions on a consistent basis to generate the relationship, which then generated the transaction. But just like grades on a report card, it just tells you what you did. It's not telling you what you're doing next. The enterprise state type companies, though, from like large corporations that have multinational contracts, you're talking billions of dollars that trade between these companies. That is a different scale of marketing and sales. For small businesses and entrepreneurs that want to really level up their sales and marketing, what are a couple key things you learned from that world that they could actually implement into their business to have a big impact?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, and I've seen this with the strategy sessions that I've run and people I've spoken to, and conversations and workshops and things like that, people get scared of the budgets. So the budgets that are in place, and they just, that's all. It's almost like everything else pales into insignificance, because, you know, oh, I'm just a small company and they are spending 200,000 on their marketing budget, and I only have 2,000, or whatever it may be.
Sure.
And I think, you know, the one thing I always try and impress upon people in that moment is that it's not necessarily the budget, it's the strategy. So at the end of the day, they're spending whatever they're spending in order to achieve a specific result, in order to show up in front of a specific target audience. But at the end of the day, if there are key basic elements that are consistent on both sides of the fence, so whether they've got 200,000 to spend or 2,000 to spend, if they get the avatar wrong, or the target audience incorrect, the end of the day, that 200,000 ends up being a very expensive mistake, in the same way that your 200,000 would be, or 2,000 would be a mistake, but not as bad as a 200,000 pound. So I think it's the basics, understanding the fundamentals, because it doesn't matter how many times I said it, and I must have said it 1,000,001 times, probably 2 million times if you include the Clubhouse conversations. But like, people just don't spend enough time on understanding the target audience. They don't spend enough time on understanding the avatar, understanding, okay, do I have one category? Do I have two? You know, do I really know enough about the interests of this individual and what they're trying to achieve? And not just what is their pain point, but what is the outcome? What is their desired outcome in that moment? And then I can take it to the next level and say, right, okay, this was their outcome at this point. Now let's look at the roadmap. You know, where are they trying to go long term? Do you know what I mean? It's just like you in the realtor business. I think if someone buys a house, in their mind, depending on the type of individual they are, depending on the person's age, depending on what age their kids are, whether they have kids or not, they will either in their mind believe that this is a house for the next 2 years, or this is a house for the next 3 years, or this is for my forever home. And they're two very, very different properties. Do you know what I mean? With very, very different things that you're looking for. So it's knowing enough about that target audience at a literally granular level. And the more you can do that, the more it's going to serve you. I could go on and on about bells and whistles and, you know, different types of funnels and all of that kind of stuff, but it's the basics. If you get the basics wrong, everything else is totally relevant to me.
Yeah, the strategy is literally everything. As you're talking, I'm working through different ads we've ran in my head. And yeah, I happen to be in the real estate business. And with that knowledge, I know the person buying the rural 2-acre property, maybe somebody that's in a phase of their life where they have a 5 or 6 year old, they need more space. They're going to live there for 15 and 20 years, let the kids grow up on the farm. They're going to work it. Then they're going to get tired. Kids are going to move out, and then they're maybe buy a bungalow that's less maintenance in an area where they don't have to deal with as much land. And, you know, the single guy living downtown in the condo, that different type of ad for him, because he maybe doesn't even have a spouse yet and he wants to be around the action, right? It's very different.
And I love that. I love the way you're mapping that out, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the customer journey. And even sometimes they'll, you know, business owners will think about the customer journey, but they'll think about the customer journey from an operational standpoint. which you have to do, which you do need to do, because you need to understand the things that you need to have in place in order to for the customer journey to be a very smooth and enjoyable process. But you also need to think about the customer journey on their side of the fence. So what is it that they're looking for? What exactly, just as you mapped out, what are the stages that they're going to go through, and how can you be a part of that journey? Because look, I think not just in your business, but in every business, if we can make the interaction as sticky as possible. I mean, I've got clients now that I still meet up with coffee for, like, I did it this week. I met up with a client this week that I haven't worked with in the last year, but that I probably did, well, easily millions of pounds worth of business with previously, and they moved from company to company, and the company that they're at right now isn't a good fit for me, isn't something that I would be able to help them with in terms of the services I offer. However, I still stay in touch with them. Do you know what I mean? Because I think when you really focus on wanting to help your clients and wanting to, as I say, be a part of that journey and spend the time to understand that journey, then you can almost become friends, and they're going to call you up whenever they know that there's an opportunity for you. Do you know what I mean? And that cuts your ad spend, cuts your marketing spend. Do you know what I mean?
And they refer you people like them, right? Like they typically attract
absolutely.
people in their world that are the same avatar. And you get closer to that person. I just shared on TikTok like 20 minutes before this episode. I've lost clients, I've fired clients, and every client that I lose is actually getting me closer to the ones that I want to work with. And if there's 8 billion people out there, I'm okay if I only work with 7 billion. I'm okay to lose a billion because there's a lot of people left out there for us to work with. And some of the insights that you're given, we're working on right now. So here's an example. And I'd love to just throw this as a case study for you, because this is how granular we're going to get in this episode. You talked about not being scared of budgets. I have 2 killer newsletters we run. One is the Prime Real Estate newsletter, which is for anybody interested in real estate in Southwestern Ontario or from Canada as a whole. What's happening with the interest rate hikes, the fluctuations in the market. It's macro, but it goes into micro in the newsletter and generates a ton of business for us. The other one is business and marketing. It is Justin. It's my personal brand and kind of what I've used to build Prime. 2 separate audiences. We have a really good subscriber count, great open rates, but I feel like more people need to see this newsletter. So what would your strategy be to get signups from a local perspective with, say, just the Prime Real Estate newsletter? What would you do from a strategy standpoint?
So just say that again. You've got the two newsletters.
2 newsletters. On one it's real estate, and then the other one is more business and marketing and entrepreneur focused. So say just the real estate one in our territory, which is Southwestern Ontario, Canada. We've got probably close to 20,000 on this one specific list. I want to double it. I want to get to 40 by Q1 2024. Do I run Facebook ads? Do I just constantly send emails out? Like, how would you build a solid newsletter list using strategies that you've learned from large companies?
Give me a quick overview of the content that's in that newsletter, the one that you want to double.
Yeah, so this we've spent a lot of effort on. So it is a letter from the editor. So my perspective as to what's happening in the real estate market from a macro perspective, interest rate hikes, multiple offers are back, and how it could impact people reading the newsletter. Second piece of content they get is our YouTube video. So they get my YouTube video going through the stats. Then we typically shout some things from the rooftop, things we've done at Prime. We just did a training with Ryan Serhant. Maybe we did some charity things. Maybe we did a build with Habitat for Humanity. Then we shout out somebody locally that they should know, some of our preferred partners, in case they want to go fly fishing, or they want to rent a boat, or they want an amazing caterer. We always profile somebody in our community that supports our content. Then lower down in the newsletter, we have proof of success. So showing what we're actually doing in residential, commercial, and investment real estate. So it's pretty broad, but it is speaking to a very specific type of person that is typically going to be buying, selling, or investing in Southwestern Ontario.
So that was the reason I asked the question, because I think sometimes we in an effort to get the numbers up, we can make the content very, very, very broad. And I think so when I'm not to say that your content is too broad. I think I'd have to have a proper look at the newsletter before making that sort of assumption. I wouldn't want to make an assumption beforehand. But I think I think for me, the most important thing really is to really understand the going back to again the customer journey, because if you think about it, those individuals, what are they looking for from, and I'm glad that you mentioned interest rate hikes and all of that kind of stuff, because I don't know where you guys are economically over across the pond, but over here, there's a quite kind of a big cost of living crisis going on right now. Energy
We're
prices
in a
are high.
recession. People just don't know it
Yeah,
yet. Like we've
that's
been
what
in
I'm
one
saying.
for a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's okay. So we're on the same page. We're
Yeah.
on the same page. So there's a denial, and I think that denial comes from a lack of information. But ultimately, the clues are there. So food prices over here are astronomical at the moment. Energy prices are super high and have
Yeah.
been for a while now. And I think for me, when it comes to getting having a great newsletter and increasing the readership of that newsletter, because it's not just the subscribers I would look at, but it's also the readership. So it's someone who speaks to someone else about your content, but maybe isn't subscribed yet. Do you know what I mean? So you
Mhm.
don't know, and this is the thing. If you look at traditional newspapers, and I've worked with some organisations that run magazines and things like that, and their readership, like in central London, their readership would be off the scale because part of their distribution would be on tubes lines and things like that. So that it was it really skewed the data in respect to how many people were actually purchasing the
Okay.
magazine. So just to answer the question for you, I would actually really try and see, okay, what data can I extract in terms of the readers, in terms of what they're looking for. How often do I actually reach out and have conversations with them, or run surveys, or incentivize those surveys to find out what they want from the newsletter, which sounds like a really basic thing to do, but it's the balance between doing that and understanding the wave that is about to land at the same time. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Because that could also tweak the newsletter and tweak the content. And I think with newsletters, especially digitally, I feel like people don't leverage the relationship with the reader in the same way that they would if it was a printed copy.
Hmm.
Do you get what I mean? So
Hmm.
what else are you doing with those subscribers or those readers outside of sending them the newsletter? And yes, look, you're the byproduct that you're probably hoping for is in order to find, it might be 1 in 5 people, it might be 1 in 3, I don't know, who are at the point where they're wanting to purchase a house or wanting to sell a house. They think of you. That is of the ultimate byproduct. But what you actually want to do is cultivate the relationship. So what are the actual I suppose to a certain degree there would be uh, the pillars before you get to that point. So how can you cultivate the relationship before you get to the point where you're talking about houses? Do you get what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you mentioned, you've got some I suppose would you call them affiliates? I don't know if you have affiliate
I call
agreements
them
in
prime
place.
partners. Yeah. So like we don't take any referral fees from the people that we connect people with in our network, because we want it to
Mm,
really just be based off, this is the best person to serve you. Here's
mhm.
2 or 3 options, so on and so forth. But yeah, we have prime partners. And as you were saying that, I'm like, what are the things that happen before it's actually time for them to buy a house? They need a
Yeah.
catering, they have friends coming in, where's the best hotel they can stay at? They need restaurant recommendations. They need a mortgage broker, an insurance guy. They need
Mm.
a roof guy, an HVAC guy. Like I have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
huge list of service providers, right? But I've never really put that out in my newsletter other than just the one feature a month, right? So there's a
That's what I
huge
mean.
opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what you're doing by tapping into and getting more, pulling more data out of that. Because I mean, do you even know how many of your readers have actually gone to some of the people that you've referred or put in the magazine and had success stories? Do you know what I mean? Like at the
Yeah,
end of the
no, it
day,
makes sense. I watch click through, but I don't know the actual conversion rate in terms of, hey, if you
that's what I
use this
mean.
guy, let me know, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you think of those statistics, all of those are all of the smaller touch points that before you get to the I'm going to use you, because you're building trust ultimately. You know what I mean? That's the reason you're sending out it's no like and trust factor. That's the reason you're sending the newsletter out. But you
Mhm.
need to go deeper with those touch points. From my perspective, like if you could actually publish a statistic, whether it's in the form of an infographic or, one of your affiliates coming on and saying, this is a success story of someone who read your newsletter, was in an absolute really tough position. Their roof was caving in and blah, 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 blah. They saw your newsletter and then they called this company and they had it done in 4 to 5 working days, whatever it may be, and if it wasn't for seeing, they might have had a bad experience before, but if because they saw your newsletter and they're in your network, do you know what I mean? Because that's the thing, it's creating the value around your network, creating the value around being part of that newsletter. And I think that's the missing part. It's a disconnect sometimes. People just think, I'm going to keep pumping this newsletter out there because I just want to stay front of people's mind. But I think that with all the noise that's out there now, with all of the different levels of marketing and social media, is probably a good segue to talk about Thread. But, with all the different things that are happening and Facebook ads and TV commercials, it's just noise. So how do you actually create a deeper relationship with that person who subscribed to your newsletter? Because every single day, every single week is an opportunity for them to press unsubscribe. That's the way I look at it. And then if they unsubscribe, then they're no longer in your hemisphere. So you're not going to be front of mind when they're, buying or selling a house. So it's keeping them locked in and keeping them really believing that being part of your subscription provides them an immense amount of value. I don't know if that makes sense.
It's great advice, because I initially were like really paying attention to open rates, right? When you're doing an email newsletter, it's if you can get to that 30-40% range, you're doing pretty well. We're close to 60 on the 2 that we run. I think overall, when I look at all of my audiences, it was 153%, but it means because they were opening them multiple times, I guess, and that gave me an indicator. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. I think we live in a world where earned media or the earned relationships is so infinitely valuable. You can lose that trust just as quickly. So paying attention to how you're interacting with the ecosystem, something I'm thinking about and something we're definitely putting work into. But I love, this is why you're on the show, that I'm able to give you a case study like that. You dissect it in front of the audience. I'm sure everybody got some tools and tips from that. So everybody connect with Marvin. You mentioned something that I definitely want to segue to. So for those listening, today is the day after Mark Zuckerberg dropped a bomb. He dropped Threads yesterday, which is what a lot of people are coining the Twitter killer. Elon's been put through the ringer over the last week as he was throttling views on Twitter and putting limitations on what people could actually see. He had indicated he was doing that to basically deal with data scraping on the platform and that it wasn't going to last forever. But Mark Zuckerberg had challenged Elon to an MMA match. And in my mind, this is their version of an MMA match. So Mark Zuckerberg, I think, had 10 million users in the last, 30 hours or so, or however long it's been since he launched it. What are your opinions on this, Marvin? Have you been on Threads? What do you think is going to happen? Is it better than Twitter? What are your initial reactions?
Yeah, I have. And apologies, the sun is kind of setting over here, so it's kind of messing up my life.
Pouring rain out here for anybody watching. It is terrible here. So, which is weird because you're in the UK. It's supposed to be raining there.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. So it's like, the sun's kind of setting and it's about sort of 6:30, 25 to 7 now, and it's kind of like, so it's interfering. But anyway, we'll keep it rolling. I think, I have been on, just like I did with Lemonade and Clapper and Be Real, and I always jump onto the platforms, and because I want to be able to have the conversations I have with business owners, I wanted to be able to say, well, look, this is, I think, would be a good idea for you, and this is why. This is how you can use it for your business, or I'm not too sure about this. It's like Clapper. Everyone ran to Clapper because of what was happening with TikTok, right? So everyone thought TikTok was going to get banned. We need to jump on a new platform. But Clapper kind of had been around for a while already, and also it's a very different. This is just my personal opinion on it.
Sure.
From the research I've done, I think business doesn't resonate very well there. Do you get what I mean? Like, business conversations don't resonate very well there. Whereas like the meme culture and the relaxed kind of approach and all of that kind of stuff, and maybe even crafts and that kind of stuff does seem to resonate much better. So I think, and look, all of these platforms ebb and flow. depending on the intake, in the same way Clubhouse did as it was going from geographically moving from area to area, different waves of people join. So I think for me, I'm more interested in how threads will evolve over time, and it's a very different use case, or it's a very different situation to some of the other examples I just mentioned, because there's a juggernaut behind it in the shape of Meta for a start, and also it's using a platform. I mean, you look at Meta turnover in excess, I think 110 billion or something stupid like that. It's using one of its strongest platforms as a funnel to get people onto threads. So no other platform, I can't think of another social media platform that's done that. Do you know what I mean? Any other social media platform has just started from scratch. Twitter didn't have a big brother of Twitter to funnel people through to land, to my knowledge. I think TikTok was another platform before and rebranded. You could argue that that's a bit similar, but this is, a perfect opportunity to funnel everyone onto threads and really present a strong challenge to Twitter. Now, for me, just to answer the question, what do I think of it? I think it's quite cool. I don't think it's anywhere near finished. There's no polls. There's no
desktop app. Like,
there's nothing.
Just started.
Exactly. Yeah. It's literally fresh out the box. It's going to be interesting to see how much of the Twitter functionality they incorporate, because Meta's got a track history of sort of nicking bits from everyone else's sort of platform.
They're good at that.
To provide. Yeah, they're very, very good at that. So it wouldn't surprise me if I saw Threads audio. Do you know what I mean? Because they'd already tried that over on Facebook, I think, when Clubhouse launched, and it didn't really sort of take off. It wouldn't surprise me if you started to see polls and so on and so forth, and they started to improve the functionality with the Creator Studio and then advertising and all of those things. I saw a comment from Mr. Zuckerberg himself saying that they want to get to a billion users before they start looking at monetization. So I think, blimey. At first I thought that's a bit that's a huge target. But then if you look at the downloads in the last 24 hours, I'm sure it's over 20 million by now. Do you get what I mean? It's growing at a very, very, very fast rate. And I think it's giving people the vibes of a new kind of platform. The problem that, or the issue that a lot of people have with Twitter is it's quite toxic at times. And I think there's that, that whole, if you think of the Twitter brand, journalists go there. People who go there, they go there for news to find out, the latest thing that's happening, whether it's true or not, and that people go there to find out who's being cancelled or who's getting dragged. Do you know what I mean? So it's got that kind of toxic element to its brand, whereas Threads is at the beginning. So they are creating their brand at the moment, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how people utilize it and how that brand evolves, because I haven't really seen much in the way of promotion that's specifically talking about the brand. You know what I mean? That's that shows the trajectory of where they want Threads to go. It's very. I feel like they're almost seeing where the users take it to a certain degree.
Which is iterative. Well, I was going to say it's iterative prototyping, right? Meaning back in the day, they would pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into a prototype and, market research, bring a product to market. And by the time it came to market, it was what the market wanted. The way you and I conduct business is very different, where we go out, we interact with consumers. The consumer gets to decide the product, and then we adapt our product to match the consumer. So I think that's what they're trying to do. I'm in a couple different camps. Like, what I find comical to me is the team sports mentality people take to life these days. And whether it's politics, whether it's your approach to the homeless crisis in downtowns, whether it's, Twitter versus Threads, like it's almost like people are wearing the Habs versus the Leafs jerseys and you're on one team or you're the other. Like, I see a world where I can use them both, because Twitter for me is primarily commercial real estate market intelligence, and exactly what you said, news. sprinkled in with some friends and some entrepreneurial stuff and maybe some YouTubers. But like primarily, it's really my commercial real estate connections that are there and like what's happening from a global macro perspective. That's what I go to Twitter for. But I curated that audience and it is very much feeding me that info. When I go to Threads, my initial thing was exactly what you said. I'm like, well, they're super smart because they actually are creating an ecosystem that flows between Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Now, don't forget, last year, Instagram took a lashing because they just ripped off TikTok and people were sick of it. Like it was virtually the same experience if you're on TikTok or Instagram, because they saw that TikTok was just getting so much traction that they basically became a TikTok clone and people started hating Instagram. Like large creators were like, where did photos go? Like, where did the purity of what this app is supposed to be go? And Instagram actually did some brand adjusting and said, no, we're going to go back to being a photo app and so on and so forth. We'll still push reels, but we're not TikTok. So they solved that issue.
I remember the announcement. Yeah. I remember.
Yeah, you remember when
this is going to be a video platform. You know, we aren't doing imagery anymore. I remember, and then it was a bit of a U-turn. You know,
it was, and I think it's cool that they listen, because I think that ultimately, if you serve the user, you will win. If you're trying to create a platform that holds your user hostage, I think you will lose. I think what Elon's done well in the last 8 months is the adjustments he's making, like the blue check marks, for example, are actually a net win for the platform because they do get rid of the bots. Like that fact, like a bot farm is not going to pay $1 million to have 1 million bots out there and just do their thing. Zuck's coming in though and saying, hey, you clearly have some organizational and some brand imagery issues. I'm going to launch my platform. I actually think it makes a lot of sense. I think competition is good for the user. And when I'm interacting on Threads, it's a broad audience. It is people in my ecosystem, people that know me, my friends, people like you. And that's the feeling I get there versus Twitter, where it's probably more people that don't know me. So I think my advice to people that are listening to this is learn to use the platform. It may or may not matter in 8 months, but don't feel like you just have to go on every platform and regurgitate all the same information. And if you're doing that, then you may as well just pick one and go super deep in it. And in terms of the companies battling it out, I think it's like Godzilla versus King Kong. They're going to do what they're going to do. And large corporations have failed in the past, right? So we'll see who wins.
Yeah, I love that analogy, Godzilla versus King Kong. And it's the perfect, because they're both giants, really. I mean, you know, Tesla isn't short of cash, and neither is Meta or Zuckerberg. So I think, you know, they're going to slash it out. And this is where I think it's the perfect opportunity to mention a point that a lot, again, I see people make mistakes on so often, where they're trying to get the platform or the software or the thing, the widget, whatever that thing is, to solve the issue, rather than saying, this is my strategy and this is the best platform or the best you know, bit of software to execute this strategy. You know, people just jump on a thing because it's new, and they think, all right, I'm going to try and force this square peg into this circle hole because everyone's telling me. Like TikTok was a prime example. Everyone was saying, oh, you got to be on TikTok. You got to be. And yes, it's got brilliant growth. Yes, you can get a ton of followers. But at the end of the day, how many of those followers are going to convert into paying clients for you based on the service that you provide? You know, I never sort of ran over to TikTok, really, for the simple reason that from a business standpoint, again, you know, you don't want to see me sort of dancing around on social media and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that it can work, you can make it work, but you have to have a strategy that fits that platform rather than doing it in reverse. Because I think that's where you end up sort of chasing your own tail sometimes if you're trying to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you, like through and through. And I would actually rather have a smaller following that is much more niched and dialed in, because you're going to have a higher likelihood that you're connecting with the right people than people that just try and growth hack for the sake of growth hacking. I think YouTube's getting away from subscriber count as a metric. I'm curious, and this is a crazy idea in my head, if Threads is eventually going to get rid of comments on Instagram. Because I've also seen people that are hacking the system on Instagram, paying people to do hundreds of comments in their posts, because then they get more followers. It looks like they have a much bigger account than they actually do. And their constant issue that Zucks keeps facing is gamification of his platforms with his bots. And just because of the scale that they're at, like, I don't even know how you'd solve that. So I apologize, Mark, for harping on you for that, but it is what it is, right?
No, it's impossible. It's impossible. And I'm desperate to actually pull the blinds down over here.
Go for it. You're good.
Do you mind if I do that? Just because the sun is.
Yeah, you're fine, Mr. Marvin. I'll riff for a second. Going back to what we were just talking about, I think it's interesting to watch these companies adapt to consumer need, because if you actually care about the person that is consuming the content and you control the UI, the user experience, and the brand perception of your product, at the end of the day, you're going to get the result that you're looking for. But what's your strategy, like you said, Marvin, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going back to your point, I just think it's I don't want to call it mission impossible, but it's a tough thing. I'm seeing more bots and more people purchasing followers than ever on Instagram as a platform, and Twitter, to be fair. And sometimes I have to think, like, you know, what are these people actually getting from creating all these bots? I mean, don't get me wrong, yeah, I get it. They can fake engagement and all of those things, but there's so many of them. Do you get what I mean? And
vanity metrics, my man. I think they just want to feel good about the account and thinking like, look, now I'm successful, right? But it is what it is.
Yeah. But, absolutely.
But going back to the conversation around the last piece before we wrap this up, I'm going to ask you a couple rapid fire questions and get you out of here. But before we get to those questions, how do you think real estate agents and entrepreneurs should look at brand management? You mentioned it. It's critical, I think, in the world that we're going into. What are your kind of quick tips around brand management?
No, I love that. And I think it's a great question. I really think that it's something that I'm happy to say I'm seeing more people actually pay more attention to. I feel like more people are really looking at their brand and understanding how important it is, and how important, they're valuing it more. But I still think there's more that you can do on it. I think the importance of understanding not just brand management, but brand extension as well. Because I think, going back to what we spoke about earlier with that know, like, and trust factor, pretty much everyone's on the internet now. And again, yes, you need to understand your audience, because depending on what types of houses you're selling, if selling houses that are for people who are retiring, then that's a slightly different strategy you might have to put in place. If it's someone who's younger, who's looking for sort of, I don't know, a beach house or something, that a bachelor pad or whatever, again, that's a different vibe. And I think you need to think about who do they really want to buy from? Because I know for a fact that if you're to shift it from property over to cars for a minute, if you're going for a Ferrari or you're going for a sports car, it's really going to be a slightly different looking showroom to somewhere that you're wanting to purchase a family car, or a vehicle for the kids, unless you're going to go to some big massive supermarket, but then car supermarket, but then that's a brand in itself, right?
Well, so I think we do a lot of agricultural land, so like farm equipment that is the same price as a Lamborghini. It's a very different showroom for a giant tractor than it would be a Lamborghini.
Yeah, but it's a different brand for sure. And I think even down to, and again, the brand extension. So not just the way that the tone that you use on your website, the type of the way that your text is written, not just the color scheme that you use, not just the imagery that you're using on your website or on your social media accounts, in your headers and things like that, but also, how do you come across? Do you get what I mean? Like, in terms of like what you're wearing, and do you look like the type of person that your target audience would approach? Do you know what I mean? Do you look like the type of person that your target audience would trust? And I think, that's where, again, go deep with it. Do you know what I mean? Rather than sort of just touching on various points, really, really sort of drill down into, okay, how can I make sure there's no breaks in the chain? Because it's the breaks in the chain that will mess everything up. Because if there's just a small break in the chain, all of a sudden your message, your brand, isn't as believable as you want it to be. Do you know what I mean? Because people will look at that break and be like, well, this person can't be that because they posted this, or this person can't be that because, you know, look at their LinkedIn page, or look at their Facebook page, or look at their Instagram page. It doesn't sort of add up. And you want to try and make sure you're reducing that. If you can reduce it to zero, fantastic. But you want to reduce that doubt and that element of people questioning whether you are what you say you are, and that's all part of that brand extension, really. You know,
that's a key point. I think before it gets to the rapid fire portion is, you know, removing that friction point. We had a recent transaction where, I mean, we are going to bat for this client. We've got him $30,000 more than anything else is sold in this building, and maybe a little bit of meat left on that bone. But really, the biggest hurdle will be, he does, like, I've never met him physically, right? Like, I've never been in the same room with him. So in that conversation, I will say to a client something along the lines of like, I know you probably think I'm just going to tell you whatever you want to hear to get the deal done because I'm tired of working on this, but I'm not. But I can tell you that we're in a declining market and that this is a slam dunk. Like, he needs to just understand that that trust piece is there. And that is never, you're never going to find an easy button that you just get it overnight. It's a constant iteration and working on it and improving the system and making sure that you're getting closer to the people, like you said, that you're going to go for coffee with, that trust you. You're my guy. Whatever you tell me, I'm going to believe you, but then you have to deliver on actually being that guy or girl. I think that's a great way to leave that section of the podcast. 3 questions for you, and then I'm going to let you go, Mr. Marvin.
I'll throw in one last thing, just based on what you just said. Also, do not underestimate the connection between sales and branding, or sales and marketing, because I think that, you know, if you can really have a fantastic brand, that reduces your sales spend. You know, I see people like constantly spending, trying to get more and more leads. But and then someone down the road who's got a fantastic brand only has to spend half as much because they're going to constantly get referrals. They're going to constantly get, and to you mentioned it earlier as well, getting referrals from the right people, you know, because once you actually know who you're going for and they refer you to their friends are going to be quite similar to them. Do you know what I mean? So it's securing that brand and understanding the connection between branding and sales.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I mean, that's another podcast for another day, describing marketing and sales. 3 questions. What are you learning right now?
Wow, that's a really good question. I'm kind of always learning. So, and to be honest with you, it kind of gets in the way sometimes because I want to make sure that I'm taking action at the same pace that I'm kind of taking on new information. But for me, AI is just the gift that keeps giving. Really, everything about AI, everything about how that is intertwining with automation and everything else. And I even sort of last week I saw another platform that I thought that I was pretty clued up on the majority of platforms out there. You know, I was an early adopter for Chat GPT and all of those things. But you know, I saw something recently and I'm just like, wow, this is just taking it to a new level. Do you know what I mean? And I think so that's something that I'm always open to learning more about, for sure.
I think the strategy of just practicing it every day, I have it as the #1 bookmark on my bookmarks, and I go into it and I just work with it every single day. And it's amazing what it can do. We're actually working on a tech stack within the office here where it's going to eliminate a boatload of manual input. But yeah, the future of AI definitely is bright. Second question, how has failure shaped your life?
Yeah, you said I've just realised you said rapid fire, so I'm going to try and keep the responses short.
No, you're good. Like you're within the parameters. There's no hard set rules. So
yeah, I think for me, how has failure shaped? I think failure is like the biggest educator for me, really. You know, I'm someone that hates to fail, hates to lose. I don't even gamble. You know, I don't bet on horses or anything like that. You know, because I hate losing, and I think that's why I ended up sort of not falling into strategy, but understanding that strategy was my again, going back to what you feel that your purpose is. Like for me, doing everything you can to improve your chances of winning is what I love to do. Do you get what I mean? Like
Yeah.
tweaking all the buttons to make sure that it's the perfect kind of mixture of everything that you need in order to achieve success. So I pull a lot from failure. Really, I pull a lot from things that don't work. I pull a lot from also seeing at what point things fail. Do you get what I mean? Because
Mhm.
just because something failed doesn't necessarily mean the whole thing was a failure. It might be that there's just this section, it was just this little bit that you didn't execute properly. Therefore, the rest of it is absolutely fine. So yeah, I do pull a lot from it for sure.
It's funny as you're saying that. I'm like, well, Marvin's such a great guest that I know everybody watched this entire episode, but I'll go into my YouTube analytics and see like,
Mhm.
where did I not deliver on the market update? Like maybe I rambled and I should have just got to the content right away. In my newsletter, like where are they clicking through? Where did I lose people? So I really
Yeah, yeah.
appreciate that insight. A question that I think would just I'd like to know personally is,
Mhm.
when you leave this earth, what message do you want to leave for the world, or really what is your legacy that you're striving for? Like, what is your why?
Wow. I don't think anyone's asked me that question before. What is the message? I think the message and the legacy are kind of two separate things for me. I think
So,
legacy
so,
for me.
so do this. I'm on a
Yeah,
desert island. There's a little glass
yeah.
bottle with a note in it that finds its way to me. It was written by Marvin Reid. What does
Mhm.
that message say for Justin Konikow?
Okay, so wow, that's a tough question. There's so many things to filter it down. I think I always talk about self-awareness. I always talk about that being the fundamental and the foundation for everything that you're going to build on. I think if you can improve that, it will really serve you. And I think moving forward, this world is just going to get more and more complicated and more um, noisy. Do you know what I mean? So I think yeah, it would be something around self-awareness and understanding the importance of mindset, something along those lines. Do you know what I mean? I think that would be the message I'd leave. But in terms of the legacy, I'm really, really, really passionate about the information I leave my kids. It's not necessarily financial now. I think I've done enough, and I still continue to do enough from a financial standpoint. But I think what you can teach them, if you do have kids, for anyone out there that does have kids, what you can actually teach them, that is going to be um, the best possible legacy that you can leave behind. Do you know what I mean? Because I know that some of the lessons and some of the conversations I had with my grandmother, who's no longer here, and other members of my family who are no longer here, certain things are stuck into my mind, and it's how I operate, or I utilize those things and tweak them to make them my own, and then pass them down to my kids. And I think that's the important thing, you know what I mean, for me, because I think that'll be here long after I'm gone.
Absolutely. You know, don't stop moving. Take care of your kids and just keep
Mhm.
going. Heard it here first. And it sounds like that is slow. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. I appreciate all the nuggets you dropped. Everybody go connect with Marvin. Remember, we do this show. Don't ask for anything other than you share it with somebody that would get some value from the insights. And feel free to go on to Instagram, Threads, Twitter, whatever the platforms to connect with Marvin. Show him some love. And I'll catch you in Clubhouse, my man.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you then, and share it on Threads. Share this link on Threads. I think that's a great idea.
100%. I'll do that right now. You guys can comment about what you thought about the episode. Make sure to hit subscribe and notifications not to miss any future episodes. And I'm sure Marvin will be back on a future episode, but I will see you later for now, my man.
Speak to you soon.